Hi, it's Mark Ramsey. Everybody wants to be talked about, right? You want to be talked about, don't you? You want your radio station to be talked about. You want your radio brand to be talked about. Recently, I had a meeting with a guy who knows all about what it takes to be talked about. He's the former head of digital at New Line, the company that brought us Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and Lord of the Rings. And in fact, he's still working with Peter Jackson on The Hobbit, and he did District 9 and so on. What does it take to be talked about? Well, that's a business that knows a lot about that. So I asked him that, and he said, look, it begins with this. He said, what are your assets? He said, people don't talk about, shocker, people don't talk about stuff that's boring. People talk about stuff that's interesting. So first, what about you is interesting? And that begins with what are your assets? What are the things around which you expect conversations to happen? Isolate those assets, consider those as separate things, and spark conversations around each of those assets. Well, in the case of radio, we assume that the radio station is our asset. What if the radio station isn't our asset? Or what if, in fact, you have multiple assets within the radio station? What if your morning show is its own asset? I was recently asked by a broadcaster whether their morning show should have their own iPhone app. Well, in their case, for that morning show is a huge asset for that station. You bet they should have their own iPhone app, apart from the station's efforts. We need to recognize that our radio station is really an aggregation of assets. Ideally, at least it should be, and each of those assets can have its own swirling circle of conversations, its own universe of conversations, its own orbit of conversations. So we need to structure such that we can service those different conversations, and we need to enable them for the audience. We can't keep thinking of this like, you know, here's my radio station and here are the four corners of the box and they're all branded with my call letters. Not necessarily. You may have assets within your station which are themselves circles of conversation, and it's your job to kind of put those out into the world and maximize the conversations around the things, the assets that naturally attract the conversations. Don't try and force it to the brand if that's not where it belongs. Think about that as you consider your digital strategy, as you consider your social media strategy, and what you want people to talk about, because it's only going to be what's interesting to them.